Hey everyone, welcome and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I will be sketching a beautiful building in Prague with ink and watercolor. So I did a sketch of the same building in the last video using one technique, and today I'm going to be using a different technique so we can see how and if these two different techniques influence the outcome. On a side note, thank you to everyone who has bought me a coffee on Ko-fi. Coffee does really keep me going, and just the smell of coffee puts me in a better mood to do more work. So, cheers to you. So before we begin, let's talk about the materials first, because I get a lot of questions about that. And I will be using these Cotman synthetic watercolor brushes, size 4 and 8 round and a 6mm filbert. And I will also be using this Twisby Eco fountain pen with brown Noodler's ink inside. So this ink is water resistant. Remember to use water resistant ink, and that is I just showed you the broad nib that is on the pen. These are some synthetic mop brushes made in China, and you can't find these on Amazon at the moment. You can find it on Shopee. I will link everything in the description down below. And this is the sketchbook that I will be using today, the same one, and this is the sketch that I did in the previous video. And I actually since we are going to be sketching the same subject again, I'm going to be giving myself some critique. So when I'm looking at this sketch, I see that the perspective is a little bit off, and we shouldn't see so much of the right side of the building if we were to follow the original reference photos. So it kind of looks like we're looking at the building straight on instead of from an angle. And that happens when you sketch freehand like I did, you know, the perspective does go a little bit off. So for this sketch, I'm going to try to change that and try to get the perspective a little bit more accurate. In the first sketch, I drew the outlines first before I did the watercolor on top. So now I'm going to do the watercolor layer first before I do the ink outlines. So today I'm going to be using this Winsor & Newton Cotman Sketchers Pocket Box as usual, and basically I'm going to be mixing 4 colors: the yellow, orange, the green, and the blue, and I'm going to be using a little bit of red. So the first color is a mixture of cadmium yellow hue and yellow ochre, and I decided to add some cadmium red pale too to make it a little bit more orange. The second color is a mixture of sap green, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and a bit of cerulean blue. Next, I prepared some cerulean blue by mixing it with some of those residual paints on the palette, and it was mostly ultramarine plus burnt umber. And here I am using this red, which is a mixture of cadmium red pale and alizarin crimson hue. Now I am brushing on some clean water onto the center of the page first, and I am making sure that it is very moist and shiny. So this is in preparation for doing a wet on wet technique. So you do have to be a little bit fast when you paint this first layer. You don't want it to dry completely before you are finished with that layer. So I started to block in all the shapes that I could see in the reference photo, starting with the yellow, orange. So I find that it's always a good idea to start with yellow if your piece has it, because yellow is very light, and so other colors can cover on top of it, but it cannot cover other colors. So you do have to start with it. So I'm doing the center shape first, which is slightly off center, and then I painted the rhomboid shapes smaller on the right side, and then I painted the left side a little bit bigger, and that gives an illusion of this that you're looking at the building from an angle. Okay, so and now I'm putting in the greens for the trees and also a little bit for the rooftops as well. I'm just using it the same greens and just doing it really simply. So, and then next I'm using that blue paint that we mixed just now for some of the windows, and I just want to stress that it doesn't have to be super accurate at this stage. You may think that it looks really messy, and yeah, it is kind of messy, but I want it to be a loose painting. I want it to be kind of free and easy. So yeah, I like this. I like doing this layer of watercolor first. So just like the picture, the right side is darker than the left side because the left side has more light. Do remember to let this layer dry first before you start inking, because you don't want your ink lines start to bleed because the surface is still moist. Alright, so now I'm starting with that first line, and you can see that it is quite a broad nib on this pen, and it's a very thick line. But the good thing about this pen is that you can vary up your line widths quite easily, and I like to break up my lines a lot. I like to make it a little bit slanting or wonky, as you know, if you've been watching my videos, you know I like to do that. But I think if you're a beginner, it is good to try not to fuss over too many details at first. Try to get the main structures in before you fuss over the small details. And I like to think about the details as like the cherry on top. It is a luxury for me to do all the little details because I like doing them. So it is a bit like delayed gratification when I draw. So I just try to get the basic big picture in before I go too detailed, and usually that is a better way to draw rather than focusing on one area first before you go to the next area. So you can see that the watercolor layer is acting as my rough guide when I'm doing these outlines, but I don't follow the shapes that I did in the previous layer exactly. Like especially for the shapes of the roof, well, the color is basically going out of those lines, and that's okay. In fact, it is to some extent quite desirable in that it makes your sketches look more loose and spontaneous. So, this beautiful building has a lot of intricate details, and at first glance, it is a little bit intimidating to sketch. But one good thing about sketching small in this sketchbook like this is that you really don't have a lot of space to put in too many details, especially if you're drawing thicker lines like I am. You are forced to simplify the complicated and to not get too caught up in the details. So, if you feel intimidated by a subject, I recommend that you start small and then you can scale up once you have more confidence. So many people actually do small thumbnail sketches of the subjects that they will be doing a painting on. So they first draw it really tiny, really small, maybe even smaller than the sketchbook, just to sort of wrap their heads around the subject. And it gives you an understanding about the tones, the values, the shapes, and it's really helpful for when you do the bigger sketch or the actual sketch. So I already drew this sketch once before, and this is the second time around. And this time around, I am much more familiar with the shapes and the structures, and I did feel slightly more confident. So now you can see that I drew the windows in the center more cleanly and with more precision. And I am really defining those grills even on the windows, and the windows on the far left in contrast are basically just a single line or just like a squiggle, and that is on purpose because I want to create the illusion of depth, so your eyes can't see much detail in things that are further away. So try to understand this concept and utilize it in your sketches, and it will really make your sketch feel more natural and more appealing. At least that is my opinion. There are no real rules in sketching or art. These are just guidelines, so you can break the rules anytime you like because this is your own world, your own sketch. So try it this way and then try it another way and just do what feels good. So the fun part for me, besides adding the details, is doing the trees, and I really like those random scribbles. They somehow give your sketch more energy and some playfulness, and I find it a nice complement to the confined and strict lines of a building. So right now I can already see that this sketch looks quite different from the first sketch that I did. So I will show you these two sketches side by side at the end of this video. By the way, you can download the line work for this sketch on my Ko-Fi page and use it as a coloring page or as a reference for your own sketch. So let's start with the second layer of watercolor. I actually let the ink dry for a little bit, so a few minutes, and I took that time to mix up more paint, and it's basically paint that the same paint that we mixed earlier to do the first layer. So remember that the right side of this building should be in shadow, so try to really show that contrast between the left and the right side. Try to show that contrast between the light and the dark portions. And in fact, don't paint a second layer for the far left side. So that is the brightest bit, and that part has the most sunlight. For the tree, I'm using a mid-tone green to lay down the second layer, and then I add some ultramarine to the same green to make a darker green, and then I paint a third layer of green. So it's a really simple technique. And don't forget to leave most of the left upper portion untouched. Don't paint it, because those regions are where you want people to think there is light shining on those leaves. Now I am using the same green to paint the rooftops, and later on I will use this same green to paint these doors. So even though inside the picture it is not exactly this same green, but still I am using the same thing because I want this sketch to be more simplified. I don't want it to be too complicated with too many colors, so I'm going to just use really minimal numbers of colors, just make it as simple as possible. So now I am painting the windows with some cerulean blue mixed with ultramarine, and in the photo you can see that the bottom windows, the bottom row, are actually darker than the ones on the top. So, and they get brighter towards the top because you know the sunlight is coming from the top. So I'm going to try to replicate that in this sketch. At the same time, I am also trying to not paint over the window grills to preserve the white of the paper in those areas. So in the first sketch in my previous video, I did not pay attention to that. So this time I tried my best to preserve those tiny little lines. So I am using a darker blue to dot in some shadows for the windows, and I am also using that for shadows in other areas as well. Now I'm painting the stop sign this red color, and if it's not strong enough on the first go, you can see me doing this right here, which I dab a little bit more paint onto the wet paint, so it makes it more it makes it stronger in one area. So I'm also using that same red to dot in some of these areas on the tree and on the windows, just a little bit, so it makes it more interesting. Now I'm painting that tree trunk with a little burnt umber. So now I'm painting some of the darkest shadows of this piece using burnt umber mixed with some ultramarine. And I have only just noticed that this roof is missing some of those spires, so I'm just going to draw a few scribbles and lines for the spires and add a little bit more details with my pen. Here I'm using white gouache to do a few highlights, and this time for the window grills or grills, I made sure to preserve the white of the paper as much as possible. So I'm just adding a little bit of that white here, and I'm also adding a few dots here and there. Now for the fun part, I'm adding some splashes of paint by knocking the brushes together or using my finger to flick the brush. I did get a little bit carried away, so I'm dabbing off some of that red paint in the center. After signing, I always find things that I need to tweak just a little bit. And because we brushed the surface more when using this technique, the ink did become slightly washed out, and we can just go back in and define some of those lines a little bit more. I think I quite like how the second sketch turned out. Alright, so let's compare the two sketches together. When we compare them side by side, the second sketch does look looser to me, and the buildings, when we compare them, the first building looks more straight and the second one looks more wonky and crooked, and for the second one the paint is going out of the lines, and I think it has a little more character to it. The colors on the second sketch are also bolder, maybe because I had more confidence doing this sketch the second time. However, I do think that these two sketches look quite similar in terms of style. So I would love to hear what you think and which one is your favorite down in the comments below. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if you did find it helpful, do like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.